Welcome to the Recruiting Stories podcast, where we celebrate recruiting by exploring the stories of leaders and top performers by digging into their stories and understanding how recruiting has impacted their journey and their success. Welcome, everybody, to the next edition of the Recruiting Stories podcast. Today, our guest is Marina Brown, founder and CEO of Moneiva. Welcome, Marina.
Thanks, Adrian. How's it going?
It's going well. I'm thrilled to have you on the podcast. We were just talking offline about some of the crazy things that happen in recruiting and team meetings, and there's always some good stories there. But I'm looking forward to learning a little bit about your story. So if you don't mind, tell everybody about Moneiva and what you guys do.
Absolutely. So hi, everybody. As Adrian mentioned, my name is Marina Brown, and I'm the founder and CEO of Moneiva, a company that really specializes in automation and workflows for accessorials in transportation. Really what we do is help companies automate the communication between carriers, brokers, and shippers for these pesky accessorials that are taking a lot of time and are usually handled all manual by a lot of operations and accounting staff.
Cool. Yeah. So I want to talk about how you got there, right? Because obviously that makes sense that there is this side that everybody I've ever talked to talks about. This is not something that's like fun or easy or simple. There's lots of processes and steps that can make that frustrating. And it sounds like what you guys are doing is simplifying that, correct?
Yep. Yes, that's right. Simplifying and automating. One of the things that a lot of people don't know is that accessorials are, for most part, handled all manual, email, phone calls, and Excel spreadsheets in even some of the largest transportation and logistics companies in the U.S. So a while back, actually, I worked for a company that was dealing with a lot of these accessorials. And I remember thinking at the time, isn't there a better process for me to ask for an approval for an accessorial instead of having to pick up the phone? If you've ever called accounting departments in some of these large brokers, you know you're sitting on the phone for quite a while. Or you have to go in and check multiple different portals for a variety of this information. And so at the time, I remember thinking, why isn't there a better way to do this? And there wasn't. So myself and my co-founder basically said, hey, let's solve for this problem. You know, sometimes see a need, fill a need. And then we did a lot of research on whether or not that's truly a problem, not just in my perception, but for actual companies that deal with this. It turned out to, yes, it's a big manual, unpleasant process for a lot of these folks. And then we kicked it off.
That's cool. Well, yeah, I mean, it makes sense that it's an issue. I love that you dove into a niche and said, let's solve this problem. Candidly, I don't talk to a ton of people who are like, you know what, accessorials in transportation, that's where I want to go solve the problem, right? But I love that you said that's where I want to go. So tell me about your background, right? How did you land in that niche, in that space? Did you start in logistics and transportation? Did you start in IT? Reel me back a little bit to your career a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I didn't start as an entrepreneur, two as logistics and transportation. Actually, I graduated with a data science, computer science degree for my bachelor's, and then proceeded to study artificial intelligence at University of Southern California, and then ended up getting a job in fintech, and that was amazing. Fintech is very difficult, right? Payments and just the general administration and management of payments is very complex. But what you would have noticed over the last 10 plus 15-ish years now is payments has gotten much easier, right? Thanks to a lot of innovation that has been brought into this sector. So in 2016, I actually jumped ship from fintech and went to work for Warner Enterprises.
Okay. Yep.
And led their product and development and data science teams on the carrier logistics side. And that was my first exposure with what logistics operations really look like. Warner at the time had this amazing kind of co-working mentality where development teams literally sat right among all of the operations staff. And so short of, being there making, getting carriers on shipments myself, you got to experience the whole operations cycle. It was great because I feel like that's how you design the best products for your customers, when you can sit down and feel their pain.
Right.
And so at that time, I was starting to kind of get familiar with, hey, there's this thing related to accessories taking a lot of time from our staff, especially when you're designing systems where your goal is to get carrier sales reps to book as many loads as you can, and you try to provide them as much of the intelligence and the automation behind it. And then you come across other processes that are actually putting pressure on your automation because they deal with something that's completely outside of their job description, right?
Right.
So at that time, I was starting to kind of think through, hey, this ought to get solved at one point in time. And then I ended up working for a startup that dealt with factoring. And then we dealt with a lot of accessorials like this. And then shortly after, I started my own business to actually solve for this problem. So.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I've got a bunch of questions based off that. So that's super helpful. So really, Warner was where you kind of got your feet wet in transportation. When you were coming out of college and like, hey, I studying artificial intelligence and all of that, what did you think you were going to do career wise? Like, what was your original plan before you were like, hey, what's this transportation world and this kind of solve these problems as you went? What did you think you were going to do, or did you want to do?
It's a great question because it's not what I'm doing right now. But isn't that true for most people, though?
I would say that's all of us, yes.
Because really, I went to USC because I wanted to build robots. And really, like, I am a big Star Trek fan.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
And
wait, which one's your favorite? Your Deep Space Nine? Do you have?
I am a big Captain Janeway fan.
Okay, all right, yeah, Voyager.
Like, I would say that I've gotten a lot of leadership lessons from her and from Picard.
Okay. I love Picard too, as you can tell.
Oh yeah, I can tell. Yeah. I feel like if you really want to be a true leader, like, you have to watch those shows just purely for the amazing amount of leadership lessons that are in those episodes. But anyway, so I just kind of had that desire of, I want to be able to create robots that act and think like human beings. And then I went to USC, and lo and behold, not only we weren't going to be creating robots, but really we were trying to figure out what's the best way to get from point A to point B in the fastest and most optimal way. Now I'm going to date myself, right? That's back in the very, very early 2000s. So I was like, that is really boring. But, the truth is that you do see the implications of that technology that was being created back then. You see them now, right? Because, like, without that technology, you wouldn't really have Google Maps. You wouldn't really, Amazon wouldn't be able to deliver 5 million packages a day, and, all of that. Grubhub and DoorDash, all of these folks are using that technology these days. So yeah, that was my goal. And then as you can see, that's not quite how it turned out. The one thing that I would say was probably along the lines of my my plans is, my parents are entrepreneurs. And so as an immigrant into the United States, some people will tell you like, oh, immigrants make the best entrepreneurs. That's probably true, but I came to the US. I was all by myself for the most part, and then afterwards I got married. And by the time you have family, and you need stability, right? And
Right.
so I didn't really think that I would get to be an entrepreneur,
Sure. Yeah.
which was a little bit sad. But
Mhm.
then about a year and a half ago, I finally figured that my kids are a little bit older,
Mhm.
and I feel like I can take risks
Yep.
financially and career wise
Mhm.
that ultimately got me to actually start something. So
That's cool. I love that
risky,
you
right? It's like really risky.
right.
So
Well, I love that you brought your parents up because one of the things that I was going to ask was there, someone influential, kind of on your path here to, whether that was pulling you into transportation or to entrepreneurship. And it sounds like your parents were people who said, because we're entrepreneurs, you know, go
yes.
do it, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And it was a big like, should I do it or should I not do it?
Hmm.
At the beginning. And my parents were big motivators that are like,
That's cool.
you should go for it. You're never going to be truly happy until you get to be your own boss and you get to call the shots.
Yeah,
And so they were just, they were part of the equation for sure. And they definitely kind of opened the door for me.
I love that. And it seems like almost every entrepreneur I've talked um, to launch, especially, it's really important to have a support system of some sort, emotionally, personally, financially. Maybe not all of those, but like at least part of it to say, "Hey, we've got your back. It's a good idea. We believe in you." Even just that we believe in you is enough to be like, "Hey, I'm going to pull the trigger and I'm going to do this because if not, I'm always going to regret it."
I think it's really hard to do it without like any support system, right?
Mhm.
Um, and really for me, not just my parents, but my husband, my family, my kids, they like all have to be on board for this
Yeah,
to happen because otherwise you're just like your life's going to be miserable. And
yeah,
it's actually really cute. So ultimately my husband ended up becoming my co-founder.
cool.
He
Yeah.
has been in technology for many years, and when I was trying to figure out the right approach of actually building my initial prototype and application, he's like, I can do that for you. So that's how we ended
Mhm.
up being in business together.
Super
Um,
cool.
but then my kids, like you should see my daughter. She's so proud of
Mhm.
her mom actually being an entrepreneur and running her own business. And
Yeah.
to me, that's like, you kind of in that same way that I was being brought into with the ultimate goal of becoming an entrepreneur, you're just kind of raising the next generation in that spirit as well. And I think ultimately that's what drives innovation in America. So,
Yeah, I love it. No, we get to have conversations about what daddy does around the dinner
right.
table a lot of times, and the easiest way. My kids are still young, but daddy helps people, right? I help them get jobs, and we talk about trucks and transportation, and so that starts to make sense to them a little bit. But like you said, it's building that idea of like I could do that too one day, and so you're
Yes.
developing those potential. That confidence in them and that you're capable of doing that one day, which again, to your point, for me, fortunately, I had enough support system between my parents and my wife saying, "Hey, we believe in you. We think you're capable of this." That I believed that I was crazy enough to go start my own business. And you've got to have the support system for sure.
Yeah. And sometimes you're like your biggest opposition as
Yeah.
well, right?
Right.
Because there's always this voice in the background that goes, I don't care. Like, even if you are the biggest, most confident person in the world, there's always this voice that sits in
Hmm.
the background and goes like, are you sure? Am I
Right.
good enough? Right? Like, what if I fail? And I feel like if you that's where your support system comes in and helps fight that inner opposition that all of us have to some
Hmm.
extent.
Yeah. So tell me then about the starting, because we've talked a little bit about kind of entrepreneurship and how you had a support system, and I love that. That's I can relate to that. And I think for so many people in transportation, there's that voice that says maybe you should start something at some point someday. So I love that. I mean, you can be an encouragement or motivation, I think, for some inspiration for some people. When it came for you to start, it sounded like you had an idea, with Warner, and then shortly after, like, hey, there's maybe something here. When were you like, all right, I'm going to pull the trigger on doing this? How did that look for you?
Yeah. Yeah. So I mentioned I worked for a startup for a while, and that was my first view into actual, hey, this is what it looks like to be a startup in the US, right? I know what it looks like to be a startup in Bulgaria and to have your own company there, but it's not the same. There's just such big difference between being an entrepreneur in Bulgaria versus being an entrepreneur in the United States. And so I worked for the startup, and then once that engagement was finished, then it was like, okay, what's next? I was either going to go back to corporate America, or I was going to start something on my own. And I love corporate America. I think they're obviously a driving force in employment and stability for many people around the country. But after 20 years, it just wasn't for me any longer. And so I was like, I am just going. This is my one and only chance. Maybe not only, but that's my one chance, and I'm going to. I'm gonna jump on that opportunity.
If not now, when? Right? If not now, when?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I'm not getting any younger, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, I think there's a lot of entrepreneurship, like spirit in supply chain, which is
Yes.
very interesting because on one side, you have all these people, they're incredible problem solvers, right? I always say supply chain is it is the biggest decentralized network in the
Yeah.
world.
Right.
And for it to work as incredibly as it does is an absolute miracle. I know some people have objections and sometimes things break down a little bit,
Right.
but like think about how you get like your pencils, your pens, your toilet paper, whatever else it is, out from the total opposite side of the world
Right.
and gets to you and to your store right on time when you're ready
Right.
to purchase it.
Yep.
And to me, that is a miracle. And it works because there's an incredible amount of problem solvers that are working together to do that. And so in general, to be an entrepreneur, you also have to be a problem solver. So I feel like there's incredible entrepreneurship in supply chain already. The other side of this is from a technology adoption, so far, supply chain has been quite behind the curve.
Yeah.
Right. On how well we adopt to new technology, what part of the whole transportation and
Why do you think that is? Why do you think there is like a hesitancy or a delay in technology adoption? Or I'm just curious because I've heard other people and I have my own thoughts, but I'm curious what you see kind of being in it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be interested in what your thoughts are. I have a theory, and it's that's my thing, right? That does not have to be what other people think. But I mentioned fintech, right? And you will remember when you had to write checks and you had to there was no such thing as a web portal, or you open your app and you can see your transactions in real time, and you couldn't go and tap at the grocery store when you're checking out, or share funds with friends and all that other stuff, right? It was difficult, like payments were difficult. And part of the reason why they were difficult is just like in supply chain, there are multitudes of intermediaries in payments.
Right.
Right. By the time payment starts at the checkout, it has to go through a multitude of payment participants and banks and acquirers and issuers and so on before it comes back as approved. And part of the difficulty was that at that time, nobody was talking to each other, right? It was very hard to connect between all of these different systems. And so for an entrepreneur or for a startup to come in, like let's say PayPal or some of those early companies in fintech to come in and attempt to create something that connects smoothly to everything means many, 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 many integrations that constantly break, right?
Right.
And you have to do so much data translation. What does transaction number mean in one system? What does transaction number mean in a different system?
Right.
So about, I want to say 10 years, maybe a little bit more now or so ago, the feds came out and said, hey, we are going to create a standard definition for the life cycle of a payment. Okay, so a transaction number, a protocol, and all of that stuff all have to be the same across the board. And oh, by the way, banks, major systems, and all that stuff that supported banks, you need to be able to expose what they called open APIs at that time. So if you're the bank, you basically have to expose certain amount of data that technology companies and startups could connect to super easy.
Okay.
We do not have that in supply chain today. There are multitudes of transportation management systems.
Right.
Or shipment systems. And to make the connection, like in order for you to connect 6 or 7 companies that will participate in a single supply chain, you have to have an enormous amount of connectivity and technology support. And so because of that, creating technology gets to be more difficult. Creating connectivity is more difficult. And just the general experience of the user gets to be more difficult. And when all these things are difficult, the adoption of technology just gets to be less willing, right? Or less willing to adopt it, because I might be able to do one thing here, but I have to jump somewhere else to do the other thing in another application.
So because it's so fragmented, there becomes almost a fatigue of like, okay, we have to connect this and we have to connect that, and then we have to wait on someone to build this to connect to this. Am I hearing that right?
Yep, that's exactly right. And oftentimes I will talk to customers or, just industry folks, and they're like, there are so many applications. Yes, there will be so many applications because one startup managed to connect to these 3 or 4 TMSs. Another startup managed to connect to these other 2 and 3 TMSs. And now these startups are trying to talk to each other. It's a mess.
Messy, yeah.
So I know that this is not the popular view, but for me, like, if we could come out to a somewhat of a general standard that exposes data easily and helps create that connectivity among all the systems that store critical data, I think you will see an explosion in technology innovation and much higher adoption.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So, how does Moneiva then attack some of those problems, right? How do you solve some of those with where you are today? Well, I know I can't solve probably everything, but like, what's your piece of the pie, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, we are connecting basically payment information related to accessorials. Let's say that your carrier comes into a warehouse and they are facing detention. At that point in time, we can alert you, we can alert your shippers to let them know that detention is in progress, what to expect from a cost standpoint. Or you end up with a lumper, lift gate, right? There are so many other accessorials that oftentimes people don't find out about all that extra charge until it shows up on an invoice that maybe 5 days, 10 days, 15 days later. no one likes surprises, right? And
Right.
oftentimes what happens is, for example, third-party logistics companies get an invoice from a carrier. That invoice is $150 more than what they were originally planning for. That eats a lot of the margin. Now they have to go chase the carrier, figure out like why the extra charge.
Yeah.
Then they can't build their shipper on time. There's delay in the cash flow. And all of that, right, gets resolved through people today.
Yep.
Your accounting teams have to get engaged. Your broker teams have to get engaged. The carriers, the shippers, and their teams have to get engaged. It's very manual.
Yeah.
And so, not what if, but how about we actually solve this through the use and automation of technology? Every brokerage comes with a set of rules, for example, but they're not much different from one to the next. Like it's actually interesting how you will go and talk with all these different third-party logistics companies, and they'll tell you our business is so much different, and our business is so much different. Yes, it is. Like there's different rules, and sometimes you'd handle different types of shipments and work with different clients. But at the end of the day, for the most part, operations don't differ much from one company to another. And what we've been able to do is create automation in order to connect how these people talk. To me, communication is the critical part in being able to be proactive around quoting your customers correctly for pricing. That doesn't just include your main shipment, but it includes all the extras that you're likely to encounter, right? And being able to just transmit information and actionable information from one team to the next, and sometimes directly from the carrier to the shipper, without having to involve a lot of people and make a lot of manual mistakes in the process. That saves a lot of time and effort. So, do we face the same challenges that we were just talking about? Yes, because what is different is that just about every customer we go to uses a different transportation system, right? And what that means is that now we're in conversations and integrating with multiple different transportation systems. All of these integration systems or all of these integrations are different. That means you're maintaining and having to pay attention to a lot of things. It gets more expensive for me. It's more expensive for our customers because, sometimes they have to pay for these integrations. And so, ultimately, we are looking to bring in a lot of automation and streamline processes, but we're in the same boat with like every other, startup in supply chain that you can't exist on your own if you are if you're in the space. So.
Well, it makes sense though that it's like I tell folks all the time. We kind of act as a fishing guide as a recruiting. Because we do it all the time. We know where to find the recruits. If I needed help with all of these integrations, right, and knowing who to talk to, and has someone seen something like this before when it comes to what you're dealing with, I'd rather deal with someone who's done it across multiple platforms and multiple companies and multiple integrations. I'd rather talk with someone who's done it multiple times than someone who's never done it before and it's their first rodeo. Yep. So it only makes sense to say, hey, let's partner with someone this is the world that they live in. They eat, sleep, and breathe that, rather than trying to go it alone.
Yeah, so. 100%. Okay, so you have to tell me now what your theory is.
My theory on
like slower technology adoption supply chain.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's very similar, right? I think it's part of it is just due to the development of so much technology and marketing in the current world we live in, right? I mean, things come out so quickly that I feel like we have access to things. And I just use like personal, like my cell phone, right? There's things I can do on my cell phone that 5 years ago would be unthinkable. location services and sending payments and just the world's your oyster there. And on some level, there's a lot of convenience things, but I know that even like when I get a new iPhone, sometimes there's hesitancy from me, like I'm using myself as an example, to update to like the next iPhone update because I'm like, well, gosh, I don't want to deal with learning this XYZ thing. And it's probably good for me, but it's just like, what do I have to learn now?
Right.
And I'm like, man, I feel like my parents, like, I'm like, oh, like it, I'm like, it's all this, this is, it's just almost just like a technology exhaustion. Cause I'm like, well, I just learned how to use this thing.
Yeah.
Now I have to use this thing. And I can't, and if I multiply that into my working world as well, that's where I feel like the stress comes of kind of like, okay, we just paid for this system. Well, now I know there's a better system, but do we is it going to improve my life that much? That's what I think people think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, like, if you want to stick with that kind of line of thinking, like on your phone, right, you have probably hundreds of different applications. The problem is not that you have a lot of applications. The problem is, like, your phone makes it super easy for these applications to be used, right? So we have a complex industry, and we'll never get to like having a single or two or three applications that you will be able to use for your work. So the problem is, or the challenge rather, is not about how do I minimize the number of applications that my people or my team is using. It's rather, how do I make these applications to be so easy and usable and accessible that it's a no-brainer that someone may have to use one application to find shippers, another application to send out emails to these shippers, a third application to find pricing, another application to find carriers, and so on, right?
Right.
All of that data is probably going into a single repository, call it transportation management system, call it whatever. But at the end of the day, you have ease of use.
Yep. Right.
And I feel like that's what we should be driving more towards than, just a single app that does it all. Because you never have, there are several entrepreneurs in the space that are trying to build a single app that solves it all. And I'm not sure it's working out.
Good luck. Well, but to your point, I agree that the more intuitive and the more user-friendly it can be, the more likely it is to be used and used consistently. Because I think of my parents that, in their late 60s, the more easy it is for them to use, they're going to use something consistently. And then I also have children, and if I allow them to use, like, they can swipe and figure things out because things are made so intuitively now, which is great. But when it comes to work and transportation technology, I agree. I think it's the more intuitive it is, the more that it can make it simple for me to do my job, right? It's a tool that helps me do my job better and do what I'm best at.
Yep.
And so let's loop that back to people, right? That's one of the things I liked about kind of what we talked about. So, I think the people side, the talent side, one of the things I saw you guys said was obviously it in some ways helps save money, but also will increase your revenue for a carrier sales rep, right? So it, on average, this percent. So talk to me about that. How can you help, let's say, increase revenue? Because for me, I'm thinking if I'm an owner of let's say a 3PL, especially in the market we're in right now, right? Rates are compressed, demand is down. If I'm making investments in anything, I need to see a payoff. So something that could help me increase revenue per head would also help me think, okay, I'm willing to add head count if I know that head count will make me X amount of dollars on my EBITDA at the end of the day. So you guys do that.
Yeah. I mean, you've been in transportation for a while, right? Remember when people used to have to actually make phone calls to find out where the carrier is? So that when they move freight, they can provide real-time updates to their shippers on where the truck is, right? And we no longer do that because we have automation, but I can tell you that this took a long time off of every rep's time, having to, one, make a call to, hey, where are you at, right? How long, before you get there, are you going to make the appointment? And then pass that information on. It was easily taking a lot of the time when these people should have actually been booking freight with their carriers or trying to find freight from shippers.
Sure.
We got rid of that, right? So that's great. Now what happened is the number of shipments that are being booked with carriers and the number of shipments that are being found has increased.
Right.
In fact, I used to work for a company where our brokers, carrier brokers, were booking 7 or 8 shipments per day. And when we deployed the right technology, that number, went up by 150%. So it's the same thing is valid when you take away all of the time that today these reps are spending in taking calls from accounting, making calls to carriers, reviewing old invoices, trying to find proper documentation, trying to figure out who the right approval party is for that information over to the shipper. Any mistakes that get made in the process, right? So we've estimated most people that we talk with, most clients that we talk with, about 20% of their operations time is literally spent in dealing with these accessorials and bad invoices. So if I can give you that, okay, maybe not 20%, but if I can give you that 15% back of your time, what would you do with it?
Yep.
You could definitely improve the number of shipments you're bringing into the company.
Yep.
And you can definitely improve the number of shipments you're booking with your carriers. Does that result in better revenue? You bet you it does. And not only that, but now if you're able to recoup more of these accessorials that you previously were not recouping, that also improves your margin. So it's kind of a double play, right? Now, one, you increase your revenue, two, you improve your margin.
Yeah, I love that. Anything to me that helps my people be more efficient is at least worth having a conversation about. And I use sports references a lot. Like, if I had Patrick Mahomes kicking field goals, right? Like, if that was my best option at the time, that's one thing, but he's probably a lot more valuable playing quarterback than he is kicking. So if I could take something off of his plate and say, hey, just focus on doing this, just focus on what you're like better than anybody in the world at, there's a good chance we're going to win more games, or in this case, book more freight, and then therefore make more money because we can focus on what we're good at. So I love that.
100%. Besides, like, you talk from a people standpoint, right? Like, who wants to be dealing with all of that negativity that oftentimes comes from having to talk with carriers on old loads and digging through documentation and arguing, no, I gave you the document, no, you didn't give me the document, and pissing off customers because you didn't quote them right. Like, show me a carrier rep that signed up to be a carrier rep because that was part of the job description.
Yeah, right.
It does not deliver any additional revenue and money in their pocket. And so it's just a waste of time, right?
Yeah. 100%. Well, this conversation has been awesome, Marina. I appreciate you taking some time to talk with us, to tell us a little bit about your story. If somebody wanted to get in touch with you and connect with you about Moneiva, how would they go about that?
Absolutely. Multiple ways. I'm on LinkedIn. So just look up Marina Brown, and you probably find me. And then marina@moneiva.com for my email address, or just go on our website, moneiva.com, and you'll be able to find us there as well.
Cool. Last question. I would like to ask one of these, at the end of the episode too. Was there a book at any point in your career that was really significant in helping you get from, hey, when I was 20 years old to who I am today, that was helpful in the process?
Yeah. Actually, I have two.
Okay.
My first one is Execution. I don't know if you've ever read that book.
I've heard of it. I don't think I've read it, but
What was the name of the guy who actually? I cannot remember, but I'm
we'll
happy.
put it in the show notes.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That's one, and the other one that I would say it's been absolutely instrumental book that kind of reshaped my life. I would say is Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. I don't know if you've ever read that book.
I've heard of that, but I haven't gotten through. I haven't read that one yet. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Like if you listen to it, it's 64 hours long. So prepare yourself. I'm proud of myself because I've listened to it 3 times. But it used to to me, that's again motivation for entrepreneurship and just an amazing work ethic and really what drives the world. It's been I call it my Bible. So definitely, I encourage everybody to read it.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Marina Brown, thank you for being here. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.
All right, Adrian. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to the Recruiting Stories podcast. If you haven't yet, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Check us out on LinkedIn, Adrian Chapman, and Cover 3 Consulting is our company page. Also check out our website, www.cov3consulting.com. Again, thanks for joining us, and we just simply want to remind you that you can change the world by putting people in a position where they can do the most good, and you do that by recruiting. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.